Well, I'll start by saying where I am, because I think place is part of place, or location is very much a part of who I am. I think it's probably part of who we all are, and we have varying levels of connection to that. But I live in the unceded territory of the Tewa, which is known as Santa Fe, New Mexico. And I am a descendant of European ancestors and Native American. And my dad, I once had to interview him about my birth, and he said I was born moving and fighting and never stopped doing, dancing and fighting and never stopped doing either. So I'm a dancer, and I'm a dance movement therapist and a somatic and a human rights psychotherapist. I also have a long background in community-based mental health and public health. I worked in that field for many years, in international relations. So a traveler, a wanderer, a seeker. I love to follow questions. I acknowledge that takes a lot of privilege to be able to follow questions. I think many people would love to do that and can't do that. So I've had a amazing educational and practical and work life journey in terms of following questions and the things that I became curious about. And my work is with survivors of human rights abuses, torture, war, political violence, refugees, asylum seekers, domestic violence. So always in service, even going back to the international work of humanity. And in humanity, I include our non-human companions. So I'm also a fierce animal rights person, and have always just found a report I wrote in 1975 about climate change and extinction. I was worried about it back then. So that's a constant thread as well. So that was kind of a long answer, but it's, yeah. And, I just, yeah, I'm always discovering new parts of who I might be. This is a great question. I was not long out of graduate school for my master's in somatic psychology and dance movement therapy. I was already working with survivors of torture. I was the lead clinician and soon to be clinical director at a torture treatment program. I had done my practicum and internship there. And I was asked to speak in a big conference in Boulder, Colorado. He met me in a couple different contexts and invited me to speak. There were some breakout things, but to speak to the whole gathering. It was a big conference, and Bessel van der Kolk spoke, and Pat Ogden, and Peter Levine, and Stephen Porges. So, and I think, I went to Naropa, so I knew Pat from there personally, and Peter I'd met a few times, and anyways, so I realized that I was getting ready to present. I was like, oh, I should probably be nervous here. And I wasn't excited, but I gave my talk, and then I think it was the next day, Stephen Porges spoke, and I was riveted. And he was drawing mostly from his work with autism, his listening project. I think at that point, he was already knew a lot of the folks in the trauma world, but I was just riveted to the idea of social engagement and the face-to-face. And I actually tend to be pretty shy, but I raised my hand and I asked a question, and the question, I don't remember the exact words, but it was about exposure to trauma in an intimate, close contact situation like torture. And whatever I asked, he said, what kind of context? And I said, I work with survivors of torture. And he said, please meet me during the break at the back of the room. And we had a conversation, and I would say it sparked questions in both of us, and it sparked what I like to call a collegial idea sharing. We've never worked together formally. His ideas began to reshape, redefine, create a lot more inquiry in my work. We've done some writing together. We used to do a lot of teaching together in Australia and Norway and Denmark and here in Santa Fe. Before, and then as he got deeper and deeper into the trauma world, he's obviously very, very busy now and has lots going on. So I don't have those opportunities anymore, but we do share ideas, either share writing, have conversations. And so it was sort of a slow immersion and a very deep immersion in his work. And sometimes he would give me assignments, like after he'd hear me present something, he'd say, I want you to work, 5 years, watch the sacrum of people who've been in combat or this, and sharing. So that's how it was very natural and organic. And I feel very blessed that I had access to his brilliant mind and his research, which, I understand a lot of it. I'm not a scientist, but immersing in it and reading over and over. And it's really, it's the frame, I would say that frame, what I call the medicine frame. I've also spent a lot of time with medicine teachers from different spiritual traditions and my clients, survivors of human rights. So those are the frames that the constant inquiry that my work has been shaped by. So that's how and I'm still coming to know polyvagal theory. There's always new stuff. It's like, oh, wow, that's great. How does that play out clinically? How does that play out in life? Yeah. The polyvagal theory is Dr. Stephen Porges' theory. It arose from his inquiry to the autonomic nervous system. So I'll give a little bit of history because he talks about this, I think probably in his book. I know he talks about it in presentations, but as he encountered, like William Cannon, others research referring to something called voodoo death, which is a terrible term. It's not Stephen's term because it's appropriating Vodou, or a spiritual tradition, but people who would go into a state in response to something and die instantly. And so he started to posit that there was possibly, that these complete shutdowns, sometimes resulting in death, I'm going to use the term, might be bypassing the sympathetic adrenal. To that date, stress and, all kinds of studies always implicated the sympathetic adrenal. So polyvagal means many branched. Right. And so what he discovered is that indeed the vagus nerve and the vagal circuitry is multi-branched, and that there are two branches, the dorsal and the ventral. The dorsal is much older, not myelinated, which means it doesn't have that juicy, fatty wrapping that is like high-speed internet conductivity. It's dial-up or no internet, whereas the ventral vagal, which is the newer mammalian branch of this nerve, and the nerve, we've been evolving over time, right? The human species is evolution in process. I don't think we're done yet. So this is all, evolutionarily gifted. But he also, in his work, the polyvagal theory, what it really illuminates is how the human response, or how the human ability to respond or react to danger or life threat, the behavioral strategies that arise from what branch of the nervous system we recruit. That's not a pure scientific statement, but this evolutionary pathway in the vagus nerve. And then of course there's the sympathetic adrenal, which is a different pathway evolved in between the dorsal and the ventral. So we've got these three neural circuits that each affords us a behavioral strategy. And we're constantly moving between those strategies, playful strategies, energized, happy, socially engaged, connected, maybe like, yeah, I want to be at this party, I want to be in this class, but I'm a little bit unsure about this, so I might not be totally myself. I like to use the term wholeness for social engagement. I might be a little worried about something going on over there. Or as you fight or flight, shut down. When there's not enough safety, fight or flight, a defensive strategy, or a complete shutdown, a complete removal. So these are these behavioral strategies are arise from our physiology, our neural circuits. And so he really helped explain how this evolving, blossoming over eons of evolution neural circuitry explains our behavior and explains why we can survive extreme events, because it's a gift towards our survival, and also how it can continue to shape our behavior in ways that might be, what we clinicians would call maladaptive or not helpful when we don't get the adequate support. And of course, the support is the restoration of enough safety that we can find our own internal climate's version of calm and connect to the world. It's a theory, I would say, of evolution, of human behavior, of change, of survival, and of restoration. We could do a very simple one. It's super simple. It's actually something I started doing when I was working with children. I had children's groups, and they were kids who were all refugees, or their parents were asylum seekers from different countries. It was at a time when a lot of the other programs working with survivors of torture were like, you should only have kids from the same country. And I was like, why? The shared experience of war is an experience no child should have, but it's a shared experience. Maybe there's things that, through the multiplicity, the brilliances of their various cultures, that would support each other. And I mean, the group ended up being so popular that I ran it the whole time I was at the center. Anyways, but when the kids would get really worked up, and sometimes it was just kids being like, ah! But sometimes, people get hyper aroused, or sometimes I'd see the shutdown or the dissociation, which might be the slow, not the immediate shutdown. This is something I made up, but people often go like this. So that's actually a gesture. In the Middle East, it's a gesture of greeting and appreciation. But people will often do this. And I noticed that. And so one day I invited the kids to lie down. So they lay down with their knees up, like you might do in a Pilates class. Or they could sit, but sometimes I'd get them to lie down and put their hand on their sternum. And I would just ask them to feel the movement of their breath through their sternum. Another way to say that is, can you feel your sternum move when you breathe? And so we can just do that for a minute. And then I would ask them to describe the movement. So I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you want to describe it, because I can describe mine, but.
Well, it's going up and down.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And that's the natural movement. So of course, there's also, people can feel the spreading, the horizontal, but the up down, right? We inhale and the sternum might meet our hand a little more, and on the exhale, it will drop down. That's the natural movement of breath. Now, some people have so much tension, maybe there's they got stuck. There may be no movement. Now we're going to let our body know that we appreciate that. Every time you exhale, press your sternum. 5 to 10% of your strength. You don't want to go, ugh, and this was kids, of course, you'd be like, ugh. And I would let that happen. And then I started to refine this over time. And I'd say 5 to 10%, maybe 15. See what's most comfortable. And I would watch the kids drop. They'd calm down. The ones who were somewhat dissociative would get more present. This very simple practice is called regulation breath. What do I think that we're doing? I think by making contact with ourselves in an area, this is the ventral vagal circuitry. I mean, I don't know that we're right on it when we're touching our skin, but we're in that area. We're near the heart. My observation is that this very simple breath will regulate the breathing, and therefore the nervous system, in a direction that brings us more towards social engagement or whole body presence. Very simple practice. We'll be playing with this, when I'm there in Belgium. I mean, we'll be playing with structured practices like this, and hopefully the group will be keen to do some, more extended movement and dance practices. And there's drums over there. I love working with drums. So but that's regulation breathing. Very simple. Oh, if we could redefine medical care, healthcare, education in terms of polyvagal theory, redesign gardens and homes, I think it would be a very different world. I really do. Really do. Well, I will teach polyvagal theory from a somatic and a movement perspective. My work is called Polyvagal Informed Somatic and Dance Movement Therapy. My dear friend Deb Dana does wonderful work. And she, Deb's been patiently and lovingly encouraging me to write this book and get this work more out there. Because, it's somatic work. I think anytime we work with the polyvagal theory, we work with the body. But what she'll say to me is, I'm not the movement person. I'm not the somatic person. Bring that out. So that's what I'll be doing. At the same time, clinicians who might not already be as somatically inclined, who might have had a more cognitive or behavioral training, will learn how to work with the body. The feedback that I get from people I teach is it makes working with the body much more accessible for any clinician. Because some people do have trepidation about working with the body, even though, as I said, we're already working with the body if we're working with a person. It will make movement. I think it will make working with movement more accessible. Because what polyvagal theory has done to my work is, I think, made it more accessible to more bodies. It's, you don't have to be a dancer. You don't even have to like to dance to do a lot of what I'll teach. It will bring in, for people who are interested in more creative approaches to working. The creative arts and the somatic therapies are getting such attention as so essential for working with trauma. So it will also give people who are working with trauma more embodied and creative ways to work. It will also be helpful for people who might feel like they need more skill in working with trauma. Because the way polyvagal theory has entered the work, I think has made the work more accessible by making it more relatively safe, more comfortable, more familiar for clients who had endured extreme trauma and who were from many different cultures and religions and lands, many different skin colors, ethnicities, beliefs. So I also will be bringing in, because of the situation in Europe right now, I'm going to be weaving in work, some of my refugee mental health work in a creative, polyvagal informed way. And in fact, what I would say is my framework, whichever name I used to call it, is a polyvagal somatic movement informed approach to working with people who have been displaced. And I know, because I'm getting emails every day from people begging, from clinicians in Europe saying, we're getting all these survivors from the Ukraine and, from one of the fastest, biggest exoduses. I've never seen so many people flee. And the atrocities are outrageous. So this will help. I would imagine anybody working in Europe right now might, if they weren't planning on working with refugees or working with survivors of torture, or I think people's practices might change. I don't know, but it's tended to be a specialized field. There's clinicians who do that work. That's what I'm hearing is people in, Estonia and people, in places just saying, we don't have the skills to work with this. So it will do all of that. And the polyvagal theory is at the heart of that because it humanizes the work. We all have a body, we all have a nervous system. And in the world of social justice, a lot of people push back against universalizing anything in appreciation of diversity and culture, but we still all have a nervous system. And yes, through epigenetics and all of that, people are saying, well, if our ancestors, were exposed to trauma, yes, we know that affects us, but resiliency is passed down too. Strength is inherited. And the nervous system has some pretty strong evolutionary cementing. So that no matter how a nervous system presents what this will do is offer many ways to work with whatever the presentation is, however that shows up in terms of a person's symptoms or personality or behavior, how we can support that person's nervous system to find its rhythms again. I mean, it's wonderful the ways that it's permeating more and more places. And I'll just say this, I think one of the things though that, that can be concerning is, well, here's the question that I ask, because all of a sudden it seems like there's a bunch of polyvagal offerings and I go, well, who endorsed it? How much time have they spent with it? And the one thing that I'll say, and I'm a big believer in humility, the work that I'll be sharing is a result of 23, 24 years of immersion in it. And I've taught with Steve, and he's endorsed the work. And that's different from taking a course or reading a book and then making something. There is heart and depth in this. And yeah, and I think that's important. Oh my goodness, I would go, there's so many places if I could fly anywhere for one day. I have so many answers coming up. I mean, one of the first things is Australia, because it's open now, but I haven't been able to go for a couple of years. And I have deep connections and friends there and a spiritual teacher there. And I'm longing for that red earth. I would also go to the Ukraine because I do animal rescue here. And of course I work with refugees, and if I could be fly and then have a superpower of getting all the dogs and cats and horses out, I would do that. And the other place I'd go, I know you only asked for one place, is Syria, because I love it there and I haven't been able to go. I was there just as that war was starting. And there's so much that I love there that I'd love to go back and see if I could sneak in as a fly. I would definitely infiltrate a few places that I could not go in my human body to be of assistance in any way that I could.